Welcome to Fragile Bonds, to the powerful stories of family, love, loss, and the choices that shape our lives. Now let's begin today's story.
In a small apartment on the outskirts of Boston, Leighton lifted her 6-month-old daughter Emily into her arms and smiled in the soft morning light. The baby's tiny hand touched her mother's cheek, and the warmth seeped into her heart. For her, working from home as a graphic designer, this moment was the most precious treasure of all. Her husband Tom was a busy architect, but he was a kind man who always made time for family on weekends. On Friday evening, when Tom came home from work, he started talking about their usual weekend dinner at his parents' house. His mother Patricia was a former nurse who had been genuinely delighted by the birth of her grandchild. Tom's sister Jessica also attended every week with her husband Brian, and the whole family watched Emily grow together. Leighton felt blessed to have such in-laws. Jessica in particular was bright and outgoing, a kind aunt who often came over to help with the baby. Saturday afternoon, Leighton and Tom visited Tom's parents' house with Emily. The spacious colonial-style home was a warm space where Patricia's good taste was evident everywhere. When they opened the front door, Patricia greeted them with a smile. Her silver hair was neatly arranged. She immediately picked up Emily and gently gazed at the tiny face. Jessica also rushed over to coo at the baby. Brian was watching the family from the living room while reading his newspaper. But recently, Leighton had begun to notice subtle changes. Patricia's parenting advice had become more frequent than before, and sometimes it felt a bit excessive. When she picked up Emily, she was told her way of holding her was wrong. When she talked about starting to prepare baby food, she was told it was too early. She knew the advice came from her knowledge and experience as a former nurse, but being corrected on every little thing made her feel like her parenting was all wrong. Leighton told herself it was well-meaning advice and brushed it off with a smile. Jessica also began to show a slightly different demeanor than before. While holding Emily, she increasingly muttered things like, "If I were the mother, I'd do it this way." Those words carried a special weight, and Leighton felt somewhat uncomfortable, but she interpreted it as her sister-in-law's kindness. At the dinner table, Patricia spoke enthusiastically about her grandchild's development, and Jessica occasionally stared at the baby with a distant look in her eyes. One Sunday afternoon, as Leighton was making coffee in the kitchen, she heard crying from the living room. When she rushed back, Jessica was covering her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking as she cried. Patricia was comforting her daughter, gently rubbing her back. Leighton called out in concern, but Jessica didn't look up and answered softly that it was nothing. Patricia led her daughter to the kitchen and they began talking privately. Leighton felt the awkward atmosphere as she soothed Emily. That night, after returning home, when Leighton asked Tom, he hesitated a bit before revealing that his sister was undergoing fertility treatment. Jessica and Brian had been hoping for a child for 2 years, but hadn't been able to conceive, and recently they'd been going to a specialist clinic. Leighton's heart ached. What must Jessica have felt every time she happily talked about Emily? Filled with guilt, she decided to refrain from talking about childcare in front of her sister-in-law. Over the next few weeks, the gatherings at the in-laws' house increased from before. Patricia said she wanted to see Emily more, and they began having dinner at the in-laws' house twice a week. Jessica attended every time and wanted to hold the baby. Leighton wanted to help her sister-in-law even a little, so she willingly let her hold the baby. Jessica's expression as she held Emily was sometimes tinged with sadness, but she still smiled gently. The family relationships appeared good on the surface, and Leighton believed she was building a good relationship with her in-laws. Tom was also happy that his mother and sister were doting on his daughter and niece, and the warm days of the whole family watching Emily grow continued. About 2 weeks later, Emily's condition began to gradually change. Her night crying became more intense than before, and she began waking up several times a night. Even when it was time to feed, she wasn't drinking her milk well, and Leighton consulted the pediatrician in concern. The doctor carefully examined the baby and said it was probably individual differences in development. Relieved by the words that there was nothing particularly wrong, Leighton still had a mother's intuition whispering that something was off. On the weekend, when she mentioned this at dinner at the in-laws' house, Patricia reacted immediately. "Your breast milk isn't enough," she declared, beginning to explain in a tone full of confidence as a former nurse. "If the quality of breast milk is poor, the baby won't be satisfied, and that becomes the cause of night crying. I'll take her and watch her for you." The offer sounded kind, but Leighton felt some resistance to it. However, faced with Patricia's professional knowledge and experience, she couldn't voice her anxiety. Tom also supported his mother's suggestion, saying it wouldn't be bad to hear a professional's opinion. The following Tuesday night, right after returning home from the in-laws, Emily suddenly began crying intensely. It was a different kind of crying than usual, and nothing would make her stop. Whether Leighton held her, tried to give her milk, or changed her diaper, the baby kept crying. Leighton's chest filled with anxiety and panic, and when she consulted Tom, he just shrugged with a confused expression. Even after midnight the crying didn't stop, and Leighton desperately called Patricia. Patricia's voice on the phone was sleepy at first, but became immediately clear when she heard the situation. "That's because of amateur parenting," she said. "Babies sensitively pick up on their mother's anxiety. Because you're nervous, Emily can't settle down. Starting tomorrow, I'll take her for a few days. With a professional eye, I'll know right away what the problem is." The words had a somewhat forceful tone rather than kindness. Leighton hesitated, but Tom urged her on, saying, "Mom's a former nurse, so it'll be fine." In the end, they decided to leave Emily at the in-laws' house the next morning. For 3 days, Leighton spent time apart from Emily. The house was quiet, and she should have been able to concentrate on work, but her heart wasn't settled. Every day Patricia sent only a brief message saying Emily's fine, without telling her the details. Even when she suggested a video call, she was refused, saying the baby was sleeping now. Leighton went to pick up Emily on the evening of the 3rd day, her anxiety mounting. When she opened the front door of the in-laws' house, Patricia greeted her holding the baby. When Emily saw Leighton, she let out a small cry. The moment she picked her up, Leighton gasped. The baby's body felt clearly lighter than before, and her cheeks also looked a bit thinner. When she asked with a worried expression, Patricia declared, "I fed her properly." Rather, she explained that because Leighton had been raising her overprotectively, she'd just returned to an appropriate weight. In the living room, Jessica sat on the sofa and said with a laugh, "You're too nervous." Brian also looked up from his newspaper and calmly agreed, "The baby looks healthy." After returning home, Leighton carefully observed Emily's condition. The baby certainly had less energy than before, and the amount of milk she drank had also decreased. When she consulted Tom, he wouldn't take it seriously, saying, "Let's trust Mom. Mom's a medical professional, so she should know better than us amateurs." At those words, Leighton felt lonely. No one understood her anxiety. But a mother's instinct kept sending warnings. The next day, Leighton secretly made a pediatrician's appointment and took Emily. At the reception desk, she didn't mention having left her at the in-laws, just saying she was concerned about the weight. When they weighed the baby in the examination room, she had lost about 0.5 pounds compared to the record from 3 days ago. The doctor frowned and said weight loss during this period was not normal. He pointed out the possibility that she had been placed in a stressful environment or hadn't gotten adequate nutrition. Leighton's anxiety turned to certainty. She had to stop leaving her at the in-laws' house. But that night, just as Leighton had steeled her resolve, Patricia called. Her bright voice said, "Tomorrow's Jessica's birthday party, so bring Emily too." The atmosphere conveyed even over the phone that absence from the family gathering would not be permitted. Leighton tried to refuse, but Tom took the phone from beside her and answered, "Of course we'll come." He said it was his sister's birthday and Mom was looking forward to it. Leighton wanted to object, but she felt crushed by the desire not to disturb family harmony and the doubt that maybe her anxiety was just nervousness. Saturday afternoon, Leighton and Tom headed to the in-laws' house with Emily. In the car, Leighton said several times that she wanted to go home early today, but Tom lightly brushed it off, saying, "It's a special party, so let's enjoy it." When they arrived at the in-laws' house, relatives had already gathered and the living room was lively. Jessica wore a new dress and was talking with guests with a smile. Patricia reached out to pick up her grandchild, but Leighton gently refused, saying, "I'll watch her today." A shadow of displeasure crossed Patricia's expression for a moment, but she quickly returned to smiling. The party started in the evening and continued late into the night. Leighton tried not to take her eyes off Emily, but fatigue was accumulating. Around 10 p.m., the baby started getting sleepy, and Leighton put her down in the crib set up in the upstairs guest room. She checked the baby monitor and returned to the living room, but somewhere in her heart, anxiety was swirling. The party continued until late at night, and Leighton and Tom didn't get home until past 1 a.m. Emily continued sleeping in the car and was quietly put to bed in the bedroom at home. Leighton, exhausted, also got into bed and immediately fell asleep. Around 2 a.m., Leighton suddenly woke up. At first she didn't know what had woken her, but she quickly realized. It was Emily's crying. But it wasn't her usual crying. It sounded distressed, intermittent, as if something terrible was happening. Leighton jumped up and rushed to the crib. The baby's face was deathly pale. Her tiny mouth was open, desperately seeking air, but she couldn't breathe normally. Emily's eyes were wide with fear, her small hands grasping at empty air. Leighton's blood ran cold. This wasn't ordinary night crying. Something was stuck in her throat. In a panic, but with trembling hands, Leighton grabbed her cell phone and called an ambulance. The operator's calm voice gave instructions, but to Leighton's ears it sounded as if it were coming from far away. Tom also jumped up and shouted, asking what had happened. Leighton explained in a tearful voice while picking up Emily. The baby's body trembled slightly, and her breathing became increasingly shallow. Tom hurriedly called his mother. Leighton wondered why he was calling Patricia now, but she didn't have the luxury to think about such things. Hearing the sound of the ambulance siren approaching, Leighton desperately spoke to Emily. "It's okay, Mama's here, help is coming soon." The paramedics arrived and quickly placed Emily on a stretcher. Leighton rode along in the ambulance, and Tom followed in his own car. The journey to the hospital felt like an eternity. The paramedics put an oxygen mask on the baby and checked her vital signs. Leighton watched her daughter with a prayerful feeling. When they arrived at the hospital, the medical staff began moving busily. Emily was taken to the emergency treatment room. Leighton was left in the hallway, standing stunned with her back against the wall. Tom rushed over and put his arm around Leighton's shoulder. But a few minutes later, something astonishing happened. Patricia and Jessica appeared at the hospital. Leighton asked in confusion, "Why did you come here? How did you get here so fast?" Tom answered, "I called them. Mom has medical knowledge, so I thought she might be able to help somehow." Patricia approached the nurses and told them she was a former nurse. Then, pointing at Leighton, she said, "This child's mother is a first-time parent with insufficient experience. She may not fully understand how to care for a baby." Hearing those words, Leighton froze. It was as if she'd been publicly declared an incompetent mother. Jessica said through tears, "Poor Emily." The tears looked genuine, but Leighton felt something was off. 30 minutes later, the emergency room door opened and a doctor came out. Leighton rushed over and desperately asked if her daughter was okay. The doctor said with a serious expression, "We removed a foreign object. She's out of danger." Leighton shed tears of relief, but the doctor's next words made her body stiffen. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you for a moment, in a private room please." Patricia and Jessica also tried to follow the doctor, but the doctor raised his hand to stop them. "Just the mother, please." Patricia showed a dissatisfied expression but had no choice but to back down. Leighton was led by the doctor into a small private room. Tom also tried to come along, but the doctor quietly said, "Just the mother first, please." When the door to the private room closed, the doctor urged her to sit. Leighton sat in the chair on trembling legs and waited for the doctor's words. The doctor began speaking while carefully choosing his words. "A small piece of plastic came out of your child's throat. At first I thought it was accidental ingestion, but looking into it further, it's not." Leighton asked in confusion, "What do you mean?" The doctor took a deep breath. "Considering the shape of this plastic piece and the position it was in the throat, it wasn't accidentally swallowed. There's a very high possibility that someone deliberately put it in the baby's mouth." Leighton couldn't believe her ears. Deliberately? Someone? That's impossible. The doctor continued, "Unfortunately, these kinds of cases aren't rare. We have an obligation to report this. We'll be contacting the police." Leighton's mind went blank. Who, why, how? She'd been with Emily all night. No, that's not right. At the in-laws' party, she'd put the baby down in the upstairs crib. Anyone could have gone in there. Leighton asked in a trembling voice, "What does this plastic piece look like?" The doctor showed her a small fragment in a clear bag. It looked like part of some toy. Outside the door of the private room, Patricia was talking with a nurse. When Leighton came out, her mother-in-law rushed over. Her expression looked worried, but her eyes held a cold light. Patricia said in a voice loud enough for those around to hear, "Didn't you put something in the baby's mouth? Maybe postpartum depression has dulled your judgment." Leighton cried out in shock, "I didn't do anything, would never do such a thing." But Patricia continued, "You've been acting strange lately. Nervous, not listening to our advice. Maybe stress has caused memory lapses." Jessica also approached and said tearfully, "Tell us the truth. No one will blame you." Leighton looked around at the two of them. At that moment, relatives began appearing one after another in the hospital waiting room. Tom's uncles and aunts, cousins. Patricia approached them and spoke in a low voice about something. But Leighton could hear the content. The daughter-in-law apparently put something in the baby's mouth. She was mentally unstable from postpartum depression. The way the relatives looked at Leighton changed. Not sympathy, but eyes of condemnation and suspicion. Leighton sought help from Tom, but her husband just looked down without saying anything. Did he not believe his wife? Or did he believe his mother's words more? Leighton was completely isolated. She had no allies. Everyone present was blaming her. Tears overflowed and wouldn't stop. The doctor appeared again and announced that the police had arrived. Two officers walked down the hallway and said they wanted to talk to Leighton. Leighton repeated in a trembling voice that she hadn't done anything. The officer calmly answered, "The investigation will reveal the truth." Patricia approached the officers and began stating her opinion from her position as a former nurse. This young mother lacks parenting experience and has been showing signs of mental instability recently. Leighton felt desperate. The interrogation room at the police station was cold and sterile. Leighton sat in a metal chair, facing two detectives. She repeated the same thing over and over. She hadn't done anything, she would never hurt her daughter. But the detectives' expressions were skeptical. "At 2 a.m., you and the baby were alone. Who else could there have been?" Leighton desperately explained. After returning from the in-laws' party, she went straight to bed. She noticed Emily's abnormality at 2 a.m. Until then, there had been nothing wrong. But the circumstances were against Leighton. Patricia had given detailed testimony to the police. "My daughter-in-law has been mentally unstable from childcare stress recently. When I tried to help, she refused and showed nervous behavior. Postpartum depression is also a possibility." Her title as a former nurse added weight to her words. Jessica also testified tearfully. "She's been acting strange lately. She sometimes showed cold attitudes toward Emily. When Tom answered police questions, he took an ambiguous attitude. I'm often not home because of work, so I don't know my wife's condition in detail. However, it's true that my mother and sister were worried. Hearing those words, Leighton felt her heart break. Her husband didn't believe her. They'd been married for 3 years, raised their daughter together, yet in a critical situation, he sided with his mother. The interrogation continued until late at night. Leighton was exhausted, tired of answering the same questions over and over. Then one of the detectives asked a new question. During the party, where was the baby? Leighton answered, I put her down in the crib in the upstairs guest room. Could anyone have entered there? Leighton thought. Yes, the door was open. There were many family members and relatives, so anyone could have gone upstairs. At that moment, Leighton remembered something. A few weeks ago, when she felt anxious about her mother-in-law's over-involvement and Emily's strange behavior after being left with them, Leighton had purchased a small surveillance camera. It was one with a baby monitor function that could also record. As a mother's intuition, she wanted to have it as evidence in case something happened. She had hidden that camera at the bottom of the diaper bag without telling anyone. Whenever she went to the in-laws' house, she always brought that bag and placed it near the crib. Leighton excitedly told the detectives, there might be evidence. I had a camera hidden in the diaper bag. I should have taken it to the party. The detectives looked at each other. Where is that bag now? Leighton answered, it should be in the bedroom at home. Please check it, I'm begging you. The next morning, police searched Leighton's home and seized the diaper bag. Then they checked the camera footage. At first, nothing was captured. The commotion of the party, people's laughter, music. But the footage after 10 p.m., after Leighton had put Emily to bed upstairs, was decisive. What appeared on the screen was Jessica. She checked her surroundings before approaching the crib. Emily was sleeping quietly. Jessica looked down at the baby, and her expression was complex. A twisted expression mixing love and hatred. Then she took something out of her pocket. A small piece of plastic. Jessica hesitated and stood still, but eventually, as if resolved, she opened the baby's mouth and pushed the foreign object deep into her throat. Emily coughed slightly but quickly became quiet. Jessica quickly left the room. The detectives who saw the footage immediately took action. They went to Jessica's home and arrested her urgently. At first, Jessica denied it, but when shown the evidence, she collapsed. Then she began to confess everything. Crying, she spoke of her suffering. The fertility treatments had failed many times. Every month, she had hope only to be plunged into despair. Going to the hospital, enduring pain, spending money, and still no child came. Meanwhile, her sister-in-law got pregnant easily and was raising a baby happily. The whole family doted on Emily, and she felt like a forgotten existence. Her mother, her brother, everyone only talked about Emily. No one understood her suffering. Jessica continued, if the baby weren't there, she would also taste the same suffering as me. Then maybe she'd finally understand my feelings. I didn't intend to kill her. I just meant to make her suffer a little, just to scare her. But the moment I put the foreign object in, I regretted it. But it was already too late. I couldn't take it back. However, as the interrogation progressed, an even more shocking fact came to light. Jessica had also consulted her mother Patricia. And the mother-in-law not only knew about this plan but had encouraged her daughter for a certain purpose. Patricia was also called to the police. At first she tried to protect her daughter, but when Jessica testified about her mother's involvement, she resigned herself and began to tell the truth. Actually, Patricia's father, that is, Tom and Jessica's grandfather, had left a will before he died. It stated that he would leave $1 million trust fund to the first great-grandchild. Emily was that first great-grandchild. Patricia had been pained by her daughter's infertility. And she thought, if Emily were gone, Jessica could adopt. If she registered that adoptee as the first great-grandchild, the $1 million would be Jessica's. For her daughter's future, for her happiness, as a mother she wanted to do something for her. So when Jessica talked about the plan, she didn't stop her. Rather, she thought together with her about how not to be suspected. Patricia spoke through tears. It was painful to see my daughter suffering. As a mother, I wanted to do something for her. But I've only now realized the gravity of what we did. We tried to hurt an innocent baby. We did something irreparable. The police formally arrested both of them. Jessica would be charged with assault, Patricia with conspiracy. Leighton learned the whole truth, and her body shook with anger and sadness. The family she had trusted had tried to hurt her beloved daughter. For money, for envy, for their own desires. Tom learned everything and was left stunned. His mother and sister had tried to kill his daughter. And he had doubted his wife and isolated her. He apologized to Leighton many times, but Leighton's wounds ran deep. You didn't believe me. In a critical situation, you sided with your mother. At those words, Tom couldn't say anything in return. The trial began. Jessica claimed in court that there was no intent to kill, she only meant to scare. But the prosecution argued that the act of putting a foreign object in the throat clearly endangered the baby's life. Patricia made a tearful plea that she only wanted to protect her daughter, but the judge's expression was stern. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was silent. The judge sentenced Jessica to 3 years in prison and Patricia to 2 years, both to be served. The two collapsed and cried out. Leighton stood at the witness stand and gave her final statement. In the name of family, you hurt an innocent baby. For money, for envy, for your own desires. True family is not blood ties. It's bonds formed by love and trust. You had none of that. My daughter will not call people like you family. Patricia and Jessica couldn't raise their faces. Tom watched Leighton's back as she left the courtroom with eyes filled with sorrow. After the trial ended, Leighton didn't attempt to repair her relationship with Tom. She told him quietly, "You didn't believe me. When I needed you most, you chose your mother's words. That wound will never heal, no matter what apology you make." Tom apologized many times and begged to start over, but Leighton's resolve was firm. A marriage where trust was lost had no future. The divorce proceedings progressed quickly, and custody naturally went to Leighton. Emily recovered completely. The memory of that terrible night wouldn't remain in the young baby's heart. Leighton moved to the outskirts of New York where her parents lived and began a new life with her parents' warm support. She continued her graphic design work as a freelancer, working from home while raising Emily. Work went well, and she gained new clients. Emily's first birthday was celebrated surrounded by Leighton's parents and friends who truly loved them. Watching her daughter blow out the candle on the cake, Leighton was able to laugh from her heart. Those dark days had become the past. From now on, she would walk a life filled with true love. A year later, Leighton had a new encounter. His name was Michael, a gentle and kind elementary school teacher. He loved Emily like his own daughter. They walked in the park together, he read picture books to her, and rejoiced together when Emily took her first steps. Leighton was able to believe in love again. And the following year, the two got married. One spring Sunday, Leighton, Michael, and 2-year-old Emily were walking in the park. Cherry blossoms danced in the wind, a peaceful afternoon. Then, she noticed an elderly woman sitting on a bench. It was Patricia. She had finished her sentence and been released. The mother-in-law noticed Leighton and the others and stood up. Her face had lost its former dignity and was covered in deep wrinkles and sadness. She called out Leighton's name in a trembling voice, but Leighton calmly stopped. Michael picked up Emily and kept some distance. Patricia tried to approach, but Leighton quietly yet clearly told her, "Never come near us again. We have a new family." There's no place for you. The mother-in-law broke down crying and begged for forgiveness, but Leighton walked away without looking back. Emily laughed in Michael's arms, reaching out her small hand trying to grab cherry blossom petals. Jessica was still serving her sentence. Her husband Brian had divorced her and begun walking a new life. Ex-husband Tom remained single, coming to see Emily once a month for visitation, but the relationship was distant. Emily had begun calling Michael Daddy rather than her father. Another year later, Leighton and Michael had a son. The four-member family was building a home filled with true love and trust. On weekends they cooked together, and after dinner the family enjoyed board games. Emily grew into a kind girl who took good care of her little brother. One night, in the bedroom, Michael asked Leighton, "Do you ever think about what happened back then?" Leighton answered quietly, "Sometimes. But that experience made me stronger. It taught me what's truly important." Michael embraced his wife. "You're a wonderful mother, and a wonderful wife." Leighton looked out the window. Stars twinkled in the night sky. True family isn't blood ties. It's bonds connected by love and trust. With that engraved in her heart, she fell asleep in deep peace. The wounds of the past had healed, and the future was full of hope. Emily's laughter, her son's sleeping breath, Michael's warmth. This was the happiness she had been seeking. Having overcome the dark past, Leighton had gained a true family.